Welcome back to the studio and to my custom palette building series. In this series, you'll be joining me as I fill this little enameled watercolor travel palette with 15 watercolor pans. So that'll be 12 full pans and 3 half pans, and guide you through creating your own watercolor palette. I'll be testing this live when I go to Australia in a couple of weeks. I am attending the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators Conference in Brisbane, Australia. I'm also really excited because I just found out just a couple of days ago that one of my botanical art pieces, Ramps Allium tricoccum, has been accepted into the GNSI's annual international exhibition, which this year will be held as a digital projection at the Queensland Museum in Brisbane, Australia, opening while I'm there for the conference. Getting back to this palette building series, in the last video I talked about swatching your watercolors and getting to know what colors you do and don't like, and getting yourself familiar with different pigment properties. In today's video, I'm going to guide you through choosing your first 3 colors. And for your first 3 colors, I recommend choosing a primary triad of cyan, magenta, and yellow. Starting with a cyan, magenta, and yellow primary triad gives you the largest possible range of visible colors that you can mix, given only 3 paints. Down in the description, I've linked to my blog post where I discuss some of the physics and optics reasons for why a CMY or cyan, magenta, yellow triad has the widest mixing gamut, more so than, for example, a red, blue, and yellow triad. So if you are interested in the science, go check out my blog post. In this video, I'm just going to state that a cyan, magenta, yellow triad gives you a bigger gamut, and in this video I'm going to go over a range of different paint options that are similar to a cyan, a magenta, and a yellow. Now, cyan, magenta, and yellow are just wavelengths of light, whereas paints are made from pigments, which are substances that have a color. And so the colors in our pigments are not necessarily exactly the same as cyan, magenta, and yellow, which means that you are going to have to make some choices. There's no one correct pigment. Each paint has different properties, is a slightly different color. So depending on what your preferences are, as well as what your needs are, you may choose different colors. So I will go over some of the options, and then I'll show you what I chose for my own colors. If you're new here, my name is Lee Angold. I'm a botanical and natural science illustrator, and on this channel I share watercolor techniques and tips and some insights into my daily life as an illustrator. If this is content that you're interested in, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. To start off, I want to take a closer look at this page that I prepared with 4 primary triad color wheels. So the first color wheel I have probably one of the closest matches to a perfect cyan, magenta, yellow triad. And there you can see that you can get quite a bright range of greens, oranges, and purples. And then of course by mixing all 3 colors together in different ratios, you can get some neutral tones. On the second wheel, you can see that I've chosen a more greenish cobalt teal, a more yellowish quin rose, and a lemon yellow. This makes for some very powerful greens and oranges. On the second row are some examples of how you can create a more muted look by choosing a yellow, blue, and red triad, or by choosing more muted versions of cyan and magenta. Now I'm going to swatch some of the options for different cyan, magenta, and yellow pigments, starting with the closest to a true cyan pigment, unfortunately discontinued PB33 or manganese blue, is bright cyan colored blue. It is heavily granulating. Unfortunately, this pigment is both very toxic and discontinued by manufacturers, but hues are still available made with PB15. Next, we've got a blue shifted cyan option. So this is more of a pure blue, in this case Phthalo sapphire blue, PB15-6, and you can see how if you choose something that's more of a blue, you will get brighter purples. However, your yellow mixes are going to be a lot more muted. You could instead shift your cyan color towards teal, choosing something like a cobalt teal made with PG50, PB28, or PB36. This will give you some very, very bright greens and some much more muted purples. However, cobalt teal is very opaque and granulating, so you might also consider choosing a different cyan just for mixing. Now, the most common cyan type color that you will find is Phthalo blue green shade. This is available in almost every starter set, and it is very close to a primary cyan, and it will mix a good range of both bright greens and bright purples. It's very transparent and staining, great color all around. If you prefer a somewhat moodier and more muted look, you can also choose PB27 Prussian blue. This muted color is the same hue as a cyan, but much darker and more muted. It does mix some very, very interesting greens when mixed with a bright yellow. Just watch out, as Prussian blue has unreliable light fastness. And finally, let's get to my choice. My choice for a cyan paint is Phthalo Turquoise, which is similar to Phthalo blue green shade, but it is shifted closer to a green. It mixes brighter greens, which is important to me as I like to paint bright green botanical subjects, but it does also mix some interesting deep purples. Next, we'll clean up and move on to magentas. So the closest to a true magenta color that you'll find is Opera Rose. Opera Rose is made with PR122, which is a quinacridone magenta, and a fluorescent pigment. The fluorescent pigment does fade over time when exposed to light, so Opera Rose is best kept in sketchbooks. However, it is unmatched in how bright and powerful of a magenta it is. Another option in the purpley magenta range is a quinacridone pink, such as a PV42. You might also consider an ultramarine pink or a cobalt violet light if you prefer something that's a little bit more shifted towards the pink or violet side for interesting purples and more muted oranges. On the other hand, if you want something that shifted towards red, you can go for something like a quinacridone red, PR209. You can see here that you can get some brighter oranges with that, but of course, if you choose more of a red, you will have much more muted violets. Next, the most common option for a magenta is Quinacridone Rose, PV19, also called Permanent Rose by many brands. You can see that you can mix some very bright reds and oranges with this somewhat reddish color, but you can also mix some fairly bright purples. It is a good all-round paint. You can also find more muted versions, alizarin crimson, carmine, and their more light fast hues, like this one made again with PV19. These will behave similar to Quinacridone Rose, but more muted. And finally, my choice. My choice for a magenta is PR122 Quinacridone Magenta. This is the same pigment as Opera Rose, but without the fluorescence. So this is basically what Opera Rose fades to. And it mixes somewhat muted oranges and very, very vibrant purples. Finally, let's get into the yellows. Your closest hue to a primary yellow is just going to be a middle yellow. One common type that you might find is azo yellow, or otherwise called pure yellow or yellow light. It mixes some bright greens, it mixes some bright oranges, just a basic yellow. You could also, if you prefer the sort of neon look of a lemon yellow, you can also choose a lemon yellow, like a PY175 or a PY3. Here I've got PY175, that's a little bit more light fast. You'll mix brighter greens with a lemon yellow and more muted oranges. On the other hand, I really love the look of a nice warm orangey yellow, like this PY153. Warm yellows are frequently called Indian yellow, New Gamboge, or yellow deep, and they mix more mossy greens, which is neat actually because mossy greens are often look more natural. And then they also mix very, very bright orange colors. There are actually quite a lot of different yellow pigments and they're all fairly similar, so I had trouble deciding on what the most common yellow is, but I chose PY154, which is just another common medium yellow, similar to PY151 above. If you already have a medium yellow that you are happy with, don't hesitate to just stick with the yellows that you know. If you'd prefer a more muted yellow, here I'm swatching out PY216 Turner Yellow. You get some more peachy tones, some sort of minty colors. It's more of a creamy consistency. And finally, let's get to my choice. My favorite yellow, and probably my favorite paint hands down, is Nickel Azo Yellow. It is not only the most transparent yellow by far, it's actually the most transparent watercolor paint in any color index. That makes for beautiful mixing. It is a earthy yellow in mass tone and then shifts to a bright lemon yellow in tints, which makes for some very, very wide range of mixing ability, depending on your saturation. Now I am setting up to paint a color wheel with my three choices of a cyan, magenta, and yellow triad. I'm going to start by painting out PY150. Now I usually use the M. Graham version of this paint, the Nickel Azo Yellow, but here I've chosen Transparent Yellow by Schmincke because I'm taking this palette to Australia and I need a less sticky paint. Next, I'm going to try PR122 Quinacridone Magenta by Winsor Newton. I've got this pigment from a number of other brands, but again, I was running a little low and I needed a pan, so I just bought a pan from Winsor Newton. Here is PB16 Phthalo Turquoise, again from Winsor Newton. I've tried this from a few different brands. I happen to like the Winsor & Newton version best. Now I'm going to start working on some mixes. So as you can see here, when you mix PY150 and PB16, you can get quite a vibrant middle green color. PY150, even though it looks earthy and mass tone, when you water it down and apply it and wash, it actually behaves as more of a lemon yellow. It has this interesting color shift. Now I'm going to paint out a purple. This actually came out surprisingly bright due to the PR122 being a very violet tinted magenta. so that even though I have a greenish PB16, I've still got quite a bright purple. Now I'm going back in and mixing an orange, and this is where you'll see a somewhat more muted mix. Because the PY150 appears orange in mass tone, but in washes it actually behaves as more of a lemon yellow. You cannot mix very, very bright oranges with this PR122, which is violet tinted, and a PY150, which behaves as a lemon tinted color. On the other hand, getting back to these teals and greens, you can see what a bright mix PY150 and PB16 can make. Especially as you get into these greens, you can get some really, really interesting bright spring greens with just a little bit of nice variation due to the color shift from the PY150. These are all strongly tinting, transparent colors, and they're non-granulating, which gives them, makes them very easy to work with for mixing and layering. Here you can see this is a nice orangey yellow, and then another sort of reddish. It's still pretty bright, but it's definitely not the brightest, especially in the middle oranges that you could get from a CMY Triad, just based on the specific colors that I chose. On the other hand, you can get some very interesting violet colors, and even some indigo bluish colors mixing the PB16 and the PR122. And now here is everything all together. My swatches, my color wheels, and then my personal color wheel. You'll notice that my color wheel is just a lot crappier and a lot more splotchy than the other ones. That is simply because I chose to use really cheap cellulose paper, and it is horrible. Don't do that, use good materials. I do hope that watching these paint outs has helped you choose a triad that works for you and determine what your preferences are in terms of a primary triad. I know that I'm thrilled with my choices, and I hope that everyone can have a palette that is as individual and personal to them as mine is to me. So here's my little palette, and I've loaded in my first 3 color selections in no particular order. I will reorganize them once I have more colors. In my next video in a couple of days, I will be discussing complementary and secondary colors to add to your selection of 3. I would really like to know, so let me know down in the comments below, what your 3 choices for a primary triad are. I love to hear what other people put in their palettes. So thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.